Good morning, folks. Welcome back to Sun Up on 7. We're excited to invite you for our second conversation, and we're going to be getting updates into the situation that's happening in Toledo. So we're going to be having representatives from the Maya Leaders Association and the Toledo Alcaldes Association. So with us, we have Mr. Pablo Miss, who's the program director, and attorney Leslie Mendez, who are both representing these associations. So what we're going to be having with you is getting to an update as to what's the current situation there, why are people in the uproar, and of course, any other question that our viewers are going to be having here today. So good morning, Mr. Pablo. Good morning, Leslie. How are you both doing today? Hi,
Good
Mr.
morning.
Pablo. Can you hear us?
Can you guys hear us?
We can hear you.
How are you
We
this
can hear
morning?
you. Good morning to you and good morning to Belize. It's a pleasure to be live from beautiful Punta Gorda.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward to this conversation with you. Leslie, how are you feeling this morning?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm well, thank you, here with a chilly morning.
I know I see you have on a nice, cute little sweater, so I could tell that there's a good vibe over there too as well. So, like Kevin said, we really want to know what's been happening. We want to update our viewers to know what is the present situation, why is there an uproar, what's happening when it comes to the communal land that has been sold. So, can you start a little bit about the synopsis of the situation at hand? And I'm going to give that to Mr. Pablo.
Wonderful, thank you. I think it's very important to just briefly go back to the meaning of the judgment, because if you put that into context, we will understand why we are where we are. So we want to be clear that there is a judgment, and the meaning of that judgment essentially is that Maya communities have communal or community title that is protected by the Constitution. And this protection is the same as the protection guaranteed to individuals who would hold a valid land certificate or a conveyance. And it is also then enforceable, that protection is enforceable against trespass, deprivation of property, and so on. Now, this has been a long process of trying to actually bring the implementation to the forefront for a variety of reasons, and I just want to highlight a few. There's been perhaps a lack of understanding and appreciation of what this judgment means by our political leaders. In some instances, a lack of appreciation or acceptance of the judgment. There's been a lot of effort to look the other way rather than to actually deal with it. Of course, internally, there's a lot of uncertainty as well by even our community members. Some saying they want individual title and those kind of things. There are third parties involved, and there is a lot of unclear and insincere statements by many of the actors involved who are responsible for the implementation. So you imagine all of that, and it brings us then to the point of where we are.
Yeah.
We are at a crossroads in terms of the implementation. On the one hand, the Maya communities have been very consistent in organizing themselves to have a unified voice before the government, pressing for the implementation. It's been 30 years, and now we're almost 7 years into the after the judgment, and we are at a point, as I mentioned, where we have communities now that are saying we cannot keep asking the same questions. We cannot be talking about the issue of who represent us. We've made some headways. We need to be able to bring some of those things to fruition. So that's kind of where we are at this point. So I imagine we'll get into the nitty-gritty aspect of it shortly.
Wow.
And so, in regards to education, because I feel like you've made a very key point. A lot of people don't understand the Constitution and the laws that you guys have that are governing the land that you have. Is there something where you believe you will try to do something of an education campaign or anything to allow people to have a better understanding? Because sometimes people are very ignorant to these things, and that's why they act in the behavior or the way in which they act. So is that something that maybe is on the back of your minds to do?
Certainly, let's. I want to invite Ms. Leslie as well into the conversation because she's been a part of our process more recently. The bottom line here is that there will never be any end to the need for continuous dialogue and conversation on land rights. Not only in the context of Maya communities, but I think nationally, there is a need for continued conversation around it because there's so much interest over land. I can tell you, for instance, just within the last month, we've been in perhaps about 10, 15 communities having continuous conversation about what the implementation process is achieving, what are the challenges, what's the meaning of customary land tenure, what's the meaning of community title, what are the pains, what are the joys that needs to be addressed. Just yesterday, we were in another village talking about some of these conversations. So there's always going to be the need for continuous education in this process. I want to give some time to Leslie to see if she wanted to offer some comments, because I think it's also important for someone like her who's not from here, seeing some of these conversations happening, which she's been a part of.
Yeah. Leslie, do you want to?
Yeah, most definitely. We want to invite you into the conversation on the scene, as an attorney, being able to hear the voices, the concerns, understand and address the issue. How has it been for you? And in your mind, how do you think that this overall situation could play out in favor?
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Pablo. On the issue of education, really, it's an ongoing process, but I think that a lot of times education is raised, or the lack of awareness is raised in a way to, in a way to kind of signal some sense that things are happening without the participation of the communities, right? Yeah. And the thing is that we have to understand that this is an implementation process. We don't know the end product of many steps that need to be taken, because this is a process that is being negotiated. So if you go into the communities, you will definitely see that majority of the people know that there is a consent order. And in fact, the independent expert that was assigned to the court praised the parties, including the government, that when she was here on the ground, most of the people knew of the consent order, and they were aware of the consent order. And so that is something that bodes well for both sides. So when you hear constantly this idea that the people themselves don't know anything and don't know what's going on, that's not necessarily fair, because what we have right now is an incomplete process, right? So there are many things that are unknown for us as well as for the government. We are negotiating it, and in that process, I have definitely been part of community consultations, actually numerous community consultations that we have done in order to, again, refresh the communities on what the consent order is, update them as to the status of the consent order, let them know what are the steps that need to be taken. And in addition to that, most definitely alert them to some of the dynamics that are emerging that might threaten the efficacy of the process. And that's the point that we are right now. But certainly there's a lot of education to be done. But I always say, we have to do it.
Yeah.
It definitely has to be an ongoing process. But I just don't want it to be unfair, because in fact, if we look outside of this process, when we're talking about laws and when we're talking about policies and protocols, really that's a deficiency that you see in the national population. It's not something that is unique to this process.
Right.
Like you mentioned, Renata, believes a lot of times our citizens are not very well aware of the Constitution itself.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily unique to this process. But you know what? What is unique are the efforts that are made to actually educate on this particular process that are not made with the other laws. So I think it's important for us to just be sensitive and understand that it's a huge task, and it is about educating people about a process that has not yet been completed.
Yeah. Leslie, we're aware that over the weekend there were two meetings held. One was at Indian Creek with different residents that came to that particular location, and also there was a meeting with the Maya Leaders Association and the Toledo Alcaldes Association. Can you give us a briefing as to what was the objective and the outcomes of those meetings?
Pablo, perhaps you can take that one.
Thank you. There were actually about 4 meetings over this
Okay.
weekend. 3 of them are they're just regular community meetings that normally happens, as Leslie is saying, this ongoing conversation.
Right.
One of them was in Indian Creek, but that was particularly related to their the situation they're facing with Flora and Fauna International there. Again, it is really the power of the community pushing their leaders to continue advancing the concerns that they have. One of their biggest issue there is this is again the clearing season to plant corn, because corn is a seasonal crop, and they are concerned that they will be again harassed, they will be bothered as they try to clear their crops. Of course, you have families, men, women that are worried that this escalates to a point where it becomes a confrontation between rangers that are posted to monitor, to guard, to watch over, to police the community members. So they continue to deliberate over that issue. In another community we were in, that was about, again, the general discussion about what the Maya land rights is, the status of the implementation, the need for communities to begin looking at their boundaries, because it is very important. I think that in almost all the Maya communities, they are very clear that they have property rights and that they're not going to be giving that up, but they need to have conversation about how do we actually begin to enjoy the fruits, the benefits of these rights that we have. So that's kind of the nature of the conversation that we were having in another village, which is San Miguel. Of course, there are other complexities in the community that needs to be dealt with, and this is why it is such a frustrating process, because the longer we take, for instance, to write the law, then the more communities become prone to festering internal problems. For instance, what's the authority of the community to make decisions? In one village that we were at over the weekend, the community basically have said, you cannot continue. It's telling another villager, you cannot continue to just grab land, where one villager has 100 acres of land. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Now, when the community tries to enforce that, you have this villager running around going all over, and there is no legal standing in domestic law that would really bring a closure to these kind of final decisions that the authority have. So we've heard, for instance, the commissioner, we've heard everybody said that the village is the highest level of decision making, but because it is lacking domestic legislation, we have these festering problems. So that's in one village. The other village that we were in was actually a village where the commissioner was also invited to, because during the tour of the minister and the commissioner, when they met with the village leaders some weeks ago, they were asked why they are not going to the villages along with the Maya Leaders Alliance and the Alcalde Association. So they had promised to come back. So that was the meeting yesterday. Unfortunately, the commissioner sent his support staff to be there. But some of the questions that were put there was these very things that we're asking. They were asked, for instance, who is Toledo Maya Cultural Council? Where are these people? We haven't seen them.
Okay.
Of course, they weren't able to get direct answers to that because the commissioner himself was not there. But one of the things that the community was very clear on is that we need to move forward with our implementation. We need to stop this thing of going around in circles. We need to fix our boundary. The biggest point that we were looking at, we were there to talk to the community, to continue the conversation on the auto delimitation, the consent that the community needs to give before the leaders can begin to work on demarcating their community lands. Now, the other meeting was held in Laguna, and this is really a standard meeting of the Toledo Alcalde Association. When there are issues before the association, it brings its membership together to apprise them, to update them, on what's coming before the association. In this instance, because of so much things being said, there is a great level of interest by community members to come along with their leaders because they want for themselves to listen. So we saw alcaldes, village councils, along with community members converging and having this conversation. Essentially, the executive of the Alcalde Association speaking to the membership as to the issues that we've been hearing so much on the media. In fact, we played clips of it for the audience because they need to hear it for themselves, because a lot of our communities don't have access to Facebook where all of this thing is happening. So we played clips of what has been said by those in government about the Alcalde Association in particular. And then the association opened it up for some feedback, some comments. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we respond? So we had members of the Alcalde Association coming up to express themselves, what they know about the situation, what they feel needs to be the direction. It was also supported by other members in the communities, because we have had many alcaldes, many chairmen who've been a part of this process. So some of the assertions being made publicly, for instance, by the commissioner, were being clarified by people who stood with him. There's a gentleman, for instance, who, when in one of the meetings, said he's now really an elder right here, and he was saying, I recall how we organized. I recall why we pushed to build the Alcalde Association, because individually we're weak, but together we're stronger. So that's the purpose of the meetings that were happening.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Pablo, for giving us that synopsis of what happened in these 4 meetings. And one thing that's very clear for me is that even though this is a Mayan communal lands dispute that's going on, it's something that affects the entire country. So how can people that are not in Toledo build solidarity towards this process?
Leslie, do you want to respond to that? We've always said that this is a struggle for marginalized people, for many of the population who has been left to the wayside. Land, as we see, is something that is important for a people and for a community to be able to create its well-being. And we've seen the impact of the loss of this national patrimony, this loss. Can you imagine one family or one company owning thousands of acres? And there are thousands of Belizeans who cannot hold not even a piece of land for themselves. Indian Creek, for instance, was saying, here is one company that wants to take 13 point something thousand acres of land. Right now, the village is saying there are 200 young people who are constantly knocking on the door of the alcalde and the chairperson for a piece of land to build their homes. 200 young people, one company. The lesson here, I think, is that we as Belizeans, we have a responsibility to do what is right. We know that we deserve to be well in Belize. We know that Belize is a young nation. And I think that what we take away from the efforts of the Maya people is that we have to be able to find a way to come together and do what is right and push our policymakers to do what is right. It's not an easy thing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pablo. Those are some really good words to end off this segment. We will continue staying updated with what's happening with this situation in Toledo. And of course, we encourage our viewers to stay tuned to the news so that you can be aware and build solidarity, participate in this process. So thank you to you and Leslie for joining us to have this conversation on Sun Up on 7. So with that, we go on a commercial break. When we're back, we're going to be joined by Mar Alliance and talking about shark conservation in Belize. So stay tuned for that conversation.